The year is 2019. The New England Patriots won the Super Bowl, again. Donald Trump was the president. Avengers Endgame marked the last decent MCU film, and BTS performed at the Grammys. In the world of mechanical keyboards, we saw the Zeal PC Stelios controversy, Massdrop became Just Drop, and Gazoo was still slanging Utemu switch parts on Reddit. In 2019, the mechanical keyboard world was much smaller than it is today, and in-stock, high-quality keycaps and keyboards were impossible to imagine. Kind of like a global pandemic that only ended when you clicked that like button. Enter Canon Keys Brutalist series. Since they started in 2019, Upas and Anna at Canon Keys had a mission to change the game, and I'd argue that they played a huge role in the shift away from the group buy model that was the norm in the hobby with in-stock keyboard and keycap offerings. And the Brutalist series, beginning with the Brutal 60, was their attempt at high-quality keyboards with a unified aesthetic at a reasonable price. For example, the Brutal 60 launched at a price point of just $200 including shipping, and $200 in our community is pretty nice. But don't take my word for it.
$200 within our community is relatively cheap. Pretty nice though, pretty nice.
Earlier this year, I took a look at the Rect 1800, which is their take on the 1800 layout. With a burger mount design and a 7.5 degree typing angle, this board was my go-to board at work where I need the numpad for data entry. But when AIO3 joined the Canon Keys team earlier this year, I knew that big things were coming. Here's the Rect 1800 V2, or the Brutal V2 1800, which was designed by AIO3 from the ground up to retain that brutalist aesthetic while improving the mounting system and the acoustics. If you're unfamiliar with AIO3, he's known for designing several keyboards that can only be described as bangers, including the original Lunar AEK, the Polaris 60, which I use in all my sound tests, and most recently the Vega 65. Which was described at one time by Twitch partner Tim Keelis as his favorite 65% to take to work. If you can't tell by now, I'm an AIO3 fanboy and I love his designs. Getting back to the Brutal V2, there are several design elements that remind me of the original Rect 1800, including the side and back profiles, which hang over the bottom case in a quintessential brutalist design. I think it was a very thoughtful design decision to not have the overhang in the front, where the sharp edge in the V1, along with the 7.5 degree typing angle, could be uncomfortable during extended typing. The V2 has a 6.5 degree typing angle, and the overall ergonomics are phenomenal. If you remember from my review of the original Rect 1800, the brutalist name comes from the French term béton brut, or raw concrete. And the design of the V2, from the silver bottom case that's standard across all colorways to the cast zinc internal weights, are great choices that exemplify the brutalist design. Talking about the mounting system, the V2 uses a single-sided gasket compared to the burger mount in the V1, and it also has more plate options and solderable and hot swap PCBs that have included flex cuts for a softer typing experience. It also comes with case and plate foam, which allow you to tune the sound and feel of your board in ways that weren't really common when the original Brutal 60 launched, but have become the norm in 2022. I've built mine using an aluminum half plate and using the hot swap PCB with Gateron Mizu Minx and Keep Front Stabbers, which are Keep Front's take on keyboard stabilizers using HDPE, or high density polyethylene. First, let's take a listen to the board in its stock configuration with no foam. So the stock board in a plateless configuration can best be described in two words: muted and flexy, which is to be expected given the gasket mount design combined with the flex cuts on the PCB. The board is nice and bouncy, but I personally think this was my least favorite configuration from an acoustic perspective. On the other hand, this board would be perfect for use in a shared workspace. Next, let's see how adding case foam affects the sound. After adding the case foam, the overall sound didn't change too much, but one area that improved drastically was the spacebar, which became more defined although slightly higher pitched. The sound of the numpad, which is how I'd expect a full aluminum plate to sound, also changed quite a bit after adding the case foam, becoming slightly higher pitched and louder as well. It seems like the case foam is absorbing some of the lower frequencies, which allow the mids and the highs to come through more. Next, here's a sound test with just the plate foam between the plate and the PCB. Adding just the plate foam led to an interesting effect, where each key press sounded more clearly defined compared to no foam and case foam. One interesting thing to note was that adding the plate foam increased the low frequency rumble, which is definitely more audible in recordings than during actual use. It also makes sense because there's a larger surface area transferring force into the desk. The numpad sounds a little more mid-heavy than adding the case foam as well. Last, let's hear the board with both plate and case foam installed. Adding the plate foam and the case foam together had much less impact on the sound of the alphas than I thought they would, as having all the foam and having just the plate foam sound almost identical to my ears. I do have to say there's less of that low frequency rumble compared to just adding the plate foam, possibly because the case foam layer is absorbing some of the energy that's being generated while typing. As for the numpad, I think my favorite configuration with the Gateron Minx I used in my testing has to be all the foams, as it had the cleanest clack of all the configurations. So now it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. First, the good. The Brutal V2 is the best 1800 board I've tried, hands down, and I own and have built several of the options on the market. The attention to detail and the design are both phenomenal. That being said, let's talk about some of the bads I encountered. First, the channel for the JST connector is great in theory, but I found in actual use that it's a bit too shallow to actually keep the cable inside. As a result, I found myself fighting the wires while screwing the case together. I ended up taping the wire down in the case after I felt some friction while tightening the screw closest to the wire, which was the screw rubbing against the wire that had gotten free of the channel. A less ghetto fix that I'd love to see implemented is a sleeved cable, or maybe some heat shrink that would keep the individual wires together to make accidents less likely to happen. So now for the ugly. Pricing on the Brutal V2 1800 hasn't been finalized, but if the original Brutalist series is any indication, I'd guess this board will cost roughly $500, which puts it in line with other 96% keyboards on the market like the KBD Fans Odin, the Win Studios X98, and the Geonworks W1AT. However, there are a couple factors that you should consider before picking up the Brutal V2, first of which is the original Rect 1800. Canon Keys will continue stocking the original Brutalist line to accomplish their mission of having high quality but affordable keyboards for the beginning enthusiast, and they slashed the price of the original by over $100, making it an insane value proposition. Now don't get me wrong, to me, the Brutal V2 is an endgame worthy keyboard, and I'd be willing to pay close to double the cost of the V1 for the V2. However, I'm obviously at a different depth in the rabbit hole than most, especially because in my experience, 96% appeal the most to people getting their feet wet in the hobby, who are transitioning from a full-size membrane board. At that price point, it becomes a harder sell. So who is this keyboard for exactly? I think it's the perfect board for someone who loves mechanical keyboards, who appreciates the design, the premium quality, and the customizability of this board, but who also wants or needs a numpad. A good analogy might be the Ford F-150 Raptor. Other trucks can haul more stuff or seat more people, and most truck owners don't need a truck that goes 0 to 60 in 5 seconds while being ready to compete in the Baja 1000 right off the lot. But if that's you, the Raptor's the best truck, hands down, for the job. The bottom line is, if you want the best in-stock 96% keyboard that money can buy, the Brutal V2 1800 is it. But what do I know? I drive a Mazda. Check out some Switch reviews to put in your next keyboard here. I'm MakerMods, and I'll catch you in the next video.